Hello, everybody. Welcome to Movie Talk. Today, we're going to be asking the question of what happened to the fifth wave? Why was this not a hit at all at the box office? And is there anything that can happen to reverse this trend of young adult movies? Because they just seem to be grossing less and less at the box office. Okay, so let's kind of get into the young adult trend and the glory days and the glory wave. And these books have really shifted. I mean, I think Harry Potter was really more of a kid's book that got made into movies for everybody. Adults could enjoy them. And I think that really whet the craze for kids' books that adults could read as well, and kind of kicked off this growing trend in publishing. And publishing, all the money's being made in the young adult market pretty much. It's domestic thrillers like Gone Girl, for mostly skewed towards women, and also young adult books mostly skewed towards girls. It's a sad state that young boys and young men seem to have completely abandoned reading, especially fiction and really reading in general. But most of the young adult books, you'll notice, they have female protagonists because that's the readership, and that's why the movie series that we've seen, like Beautiful Creatures, The Immortal Instruments, and of course Twilight and Hunger Games, and then now the fifth wave, they mostly star female protagonists. Divergent as well. So how can these movies come back? Can they come back? Is it even going to be possible? I think Twilight took the Harry Potter craze and they shifted it towards a very real need for books and movies about young women out there. At that time, there weren't a lot of blockbusters really about young women, and a lot of people really hated the Twilight movies because it took kind of what was pretty much a male-dominated category, and it put a love triangle that wasn't just part of the scenery. It wasn't just a backdrop in between action set pieces. The love triangle was the action, and the action was kind of secondary. It was almost at tacked on, and who really cares about this? And I think that really aggravated a lot of people, but it opened people's eyes to the idea that movies that really tap into the inner life of young girls can be profitable. And that opened the way to the Hunger Games. It became a huge blockbuster franchise, but Hunger Games added all these action elements. I mean, it was a little bit The Running Man and a little bit, I mean, it had all these different things added into it. And then, of course, you started seeing really every single book that came out that was a big hit had a female protagonist and a love triangle and some type of fantasy or sci-fi element, which is why we've seen increasingly movies that are less and less popular. So Divergent series, it's going to be able to finish. They're going to film all the books into movies, which I guess is a triumph at this late stage because so many young adult adaptations, they're not getting finished at all. This started with The Golden Compass, a trio of books that many people said had atheist overtones, and they were like the agnostic version of the Chronicles of Narnia. But when the first Golden Compass book came out, I was pretty excited about it. I went and watched it, and then that series went nowhere. They didn't even bother to finish it. And now it looks like that's going to happen to Beautiful Creatures, which flopped at the box office, Immortal Instruments, which flopped at the box office, and then has now become a TV show on ABC Family or Freeform or whatever the hell they're going by these days. And I'm afraid that same fate is going to befall the fifth wave, even though I actually kind of like this movie. I mean, I wouldn't call it a great movie, but it's a movie that came out at the end of January, and I had no expectation. I mean, end of January is a classic dumping ground for Hollywood movies. It's mostly set up so that the movies that come out around at the end of the year, the indie releases, they can have a wider platform to grow, and studios can dump all the shitty movies that they had no Oscar hopes for in January and February. So the fifth wave, I thought, this is a Z-grade young adult adaptation that's probably not going to be very good, and they dumped it in this time period because they don't think it's very good. But I was surprised. I went in with absolutely no expectations, and I have to say I had a pretty good time with it. I certainly thought it was a better movie overall than The Maze Runner and the Divergent series, Beautiful Creatures, and The Immortal Instruments. I mean, it was probably the best time I've had with one of these franchises since the Hunger Games. What I really liked about it was that Chloe Grace Moritz is kind of taking the best elements of Shailene Woodley from the Divergent series and Jennifer Lawrence from the Hunger Games. She's taken the steeliness and the warrior and the badass attitude of Katniss, but she's combining it with the more vulnerable side of the Divergent series. And I think it's a female character that girls can actually relate to, which is what they like about the Divergent series, but it still has probably a bit more action, and she's a bit more badass. And I like that the movie's not afraid to get her hands dirty. In the very first scene of the movie, she kills somebody, an innocent person that she thinks is armed, but they're really not dangerous. And in that sense of murder in the very beginning, they're setting us up for something the Hunger Games never had the balls to do. They never wanted Katniss to get too dirty or compromised, even when she's leading a revolution. So I think the movie's willing to take chances that other series are not. But what I really liked was this sense of libertarian paranoia, because the aliens can take human form and they're not really sure who's an alien and who's not an alien. The military is perhaps not the most benevolent force early on in the beginning. They murder a whole, basically, town of adults. And so there's kind of this libertarian paranoia, confusion, conspiracy thriller element of who do we trust. And that layers in nicely with teenage paranoia. I mean, it's a nice allegory for the very real fear and alienation and distrust of authority that actual teenagers feel. I can see why the books might have been a hit for young adults and particularly preteens and teens, because the same struggles they're going through in this with who's an alien, is the military really good, who are the real killers, who should we really be against, what do these authority figures, what do they really want from me, what's the sinister purpose? I mean, of course, what 12 to 20-year-old has never felt that way. So this is really cagey to tap into this fear and anxiety, and I think that's become the growing trend. In The Maze Runner, they're part of a sinister government experiment. In Divergent, they're part of a sinister government experiment. In The Hunger Games, they're part of a sinister government experiment. Oh, you know what? I'm sensing a theme here. And in this one, when the government plays them off, I guess that's partly true. Maybe we ought to see if Rand Paul has started some kind of second career ghostwriting young adult books. And maybe young adult writers are more libertarian than we thought they were.